So, and this class has like various levels of people in it. Some of you will not have taken an LSAT or took your first LSAT yesterday, and then others have been studying for quite some time. I'm actually going to send out a survey after this class so that I can have just kind of like a profile of who's in it. But the class is varying levels, and some people ask, like, is it a beginner course, is it an advanced course? Basically, whenever I've taught an LSAT course or whenever I tutor someone, I don't really have like a beginner or an advanced level. I just say all the things that you need to know in order to study properly and the strategies that I use when doing questions. And in my experience, even people at like a very high level often miss like some pretty basic things on, like, say, how to properly time yourself. So, or basic logical reasoning approach. So basically, I'm just going to give best practices. And so it's going to be aimed at both people that have studied or have not. Okay, so to get started. So the LSAT is a test that has 4 different test dates. So I'm just going to talk now about like when to take it, how to take it, and the purpose of the LSAT. So the LSAT has 4 different test dates, and so if you search LSAT test dates and go to LSAT, you can find, this is where you find registrations. And if you're overseas or if you have like a religious exemption from writing on a Saturday, there are different dates. But generally speaking, there are 4 test dates: February, June, October, and December. October is sometimes in September. I'm going to call it October or fall, but like I think this year it's September. They just started switching it up recently. Now, when to take the LSAT? I'm guessing most people here are taking the June LSAT, but this is still relevant because repeating is definitely a factor now. So I would say the best test dates to plan to take the LSAT are June and October. The reason for this is because law schools have been doing a change recently, and more or less they just look at your highest score. Some of them still say we consider all scores, but unless they're Harvard or Stanford, generally it's not really a thing. They just take the highest. The reason for this is that law student application numbers have been declining. If you look at, there's a page on LSAT called LSATs Administered, and it's quite interesting. You can actually see all the LSAT numbers since 1987. And there was this big spike in 2010, or in 2009, 2010, where there were 171 people taking the LSAT. And now we're down to 105,000. So this has been like a massive drop in the total number of people applying to law school. And it's probably even bigger than it looks because there's a lot more people retaking now. So law school admissions applicants are in free fall, in part because the tuitions have gone up quite a bit and the job market's a bit worse. So schools are kind of desperate for applicants because there's fewer of them. So basically at some point there's going to be some law schools that'll have to close, most likely. No, so why does this mean they're only taking the highest LSAT score? It's because the law schools are ranked on their GPA and LSAT percentiles. If you have a better GPA of your entering class or a better LSAT score of your entering class on average, you get a higher ranking. So schools care about this, and that's why they only take the highest, because they're only required to report the highest. So if someone takes it 3 times, gets like a 140, a 142, and a 168, I mean, well, a school might wonder about that, but just in terms of reporting, they only have to report the 168. So that will help their ranking. So back to when to take it. This means June and October are good dates because it's quite likely a good idea to take the LSAT a second time. Let's say you're aiming for like 165 or above, and your average practice test range is 163 to 167. And then you take the June LSAT and you get a 164. Or a 160, you got a 165. So that was like within your goal range. You were aiming for 165 or above and you got it. But you were sometimes getting higher. It's quite possible that if you took an LSAT the second time, just like by randomness, you might get 167, even if you made no improvement. So it could be advisable to take the LSAT a second time. Or if you were going to run up to June and you were still improving in the weeks leading up to it, and you hit your target score, you still probably want to get take a second take and get a higher score, because those higher scores get you enrollment to better schools and they give you bigger scholarships. This has become a very big factor in recent years. even since 2010, tuitions have increased from something like 33,000 to 48,000. Like, it's just been a massive tuition growth. But the actual price paid has not grown as much because schools have been raising tuitions so that some of the full prices paid by some people subsidize scholarships for other people. So actual scholarships given has increased greatly. And for that reason, so like a higher LSAT score, it used to just get you admission to a better school. Now it gets you a better scholarship. So you might go from getting like 10,000 a year to 40,000 a year. So over 3 years, that would be 120,000, and that would be 120,000 that wouldn't have to be debt for most of you. So it can make a major difference compared to almost anything else because your GPA is already set. So for that reason, I've been recommending multiple takes as a pretty standard course of action. And so June and October are good for that purpose because they leave you plenty of time to take again. And a couple other small things. I doubt any of you will be taking February, but just one note about that. You don't get your test back if you take February, whereas you do get it back from all the other times. And as for December's still fine for the admission cycle. Earlier is better. So October is like mildly better than December, but they're both pretty good. The only difference again, I don't think anyone's planning this for December in this class, but if you were, then the December one's going to be a bit too late because if it doesn't go well, you'll need to take it again and you'll be a bit late in the cycle then. And I can say with confidence that on average, like maybe 30-40% of people will get a bit lower than their prep test score. Like, it's just the nature of randomness. If you take enough timed LSAT practice tests, you're going to see score fluctuations. And so taking it just once is highly unlikely to get you your highest potential score, even if your skills stay constant. Like, after you guys prep for a while, you'll kind of reach a point where your scores don't really go up on average. I mean, you can always break through that, but it gets harder. So you're going to reach a point where you're kind of plateaued. But your plateau is going to kind of look like this. And so you can take a test day that gets you there in a randomness cycle, and if you took a second one, you'd be up there. That's like with the same skill level, but you just have this gap due to randomness. So I generally recommend multiple takes unless, you're scoring on average 163 to 167 and you get a 168. I wouldn't take again then because you did well and you outperformed your score average even on the top range, and unless you were still improving and you feel you could improve more, there's likely no advantage to a second take. So I also want to talk about how to take a timed LSAT. For those that were at the diagnostic session, we went over it a bit yesterday, but I'm going to go over it again. It's pretty easy to mess up. Most people are doing at least like one thing wrong. Even I got fooled a bit about like bubbling. So when you're taking a timed LSAT, I'll just show you a few of the tools to use. One, you can't use a cell phone to time yourself. So when you're practicing, don't use a cell phone. Use a watch like this. This is a $10 Casio watch from Amazon. I got it about 3 years ago. And it's worked perfectly. Looks decent. Does the job. So you get one of these, and the way you time yourself is they're 35-minute sections. So if you set it to 11:25, then once it starts, the end of the section is going to be 12 o'clock, and it'll take you a second and a half to wind back. If you go to LSAT forums, you'll see like endless threads about what kind of LSAT watch to get, and like they made special watches for the LSAT. None of that's probably counterproductive. I think people just like are not used to watches anymore or how to wind them. But if you practice winding it for a minute and use the 11:25 to 12 o'clock system, or some people use 12 to 12:35, either ones, they're about the same. It really takes a second and a half to wind a watch, so there's no reason. I think the LSAT watches are less efficient. So a watch is one thing. I recommend for your own practice that you actually take a cell phone, put it on airplane mode, and use that as a timer in the background so that your time is exactly 35 minutes, and then you just stop when it's 35. You can also use the 7Sage Proctor app, which is a very good app. They just read the official instructions of what the LSAT will be. Having that like prevents you from needing to use willpower to check. It'll read out all the break timings as well. Other things, no pens and no mechanical pencils. You need a wooden number 2 pencil, and you can have an eraser like this. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can't have this eraser sleeve because maybe you could have notes in it, so your eraser's got to look like this instead. But that, if you want to practice with the sleeve and just take it off for test day, that's fine. That one's not going to matter. So watch, pencil and paper. When you take the LSAT, it should be printed. Some of you may have PDF prep tests. Those are great. But don't take the test on your computer screen. You have to print it to use it. And you also have to print the answer sheet. And you also can't use scrap paper. We're going to talk more about this for logic games, but when you're doing the LSAT, no scrap paper at all. And if you practice using scrap paper or writing on another page, then you're not building the skills that you will need for test day. Because when I'm doing a question, I actually am eliminating different answers, and there's visual feedback from seeing that one answer is blacked out. It actually changes how I do the test. So you want to practice on test paper. But in this course, I'm also going to recommend redoing material. So how to square that? It's either worth buying a second copy of the book or making a visit to the photocopy shop and making a bunch of photocopies of tests that you're going to do. Just erasing the stuff in the test can take a while and isn't perfect. So I recommend making photocopies because I think it's very useful, especially for logic games, but for all sections, to be able to redo stuff. But you must do stuff on the page. So don't use a scrapbook and then do a different system when you're on test day. You're not going to be giving yourself the right kind of training. So no scrap paper. One other note, if you're printing stuff, the reading comprehension should be on facing pages. Same with the logic games. Sometimes when people have PDFs, they've got the game rules here and then the game questions on the other side. And that's no good because you are going to be way slower than you would be on test day where it's on facing pages. There's a lot of little things that I've just seen people constantly have some of these screwing them up. The last one is the answer sheet. Oh, here we go. So the answer sheet looks like this. If you search LSAT answer sheet, you can... Actually, Lucas, can you send them a link to one of the LSAT answer sheets? There's plenty online. 7 Sage or Cambridge LSAT have one. And you want to just print a stack of those and use them all the time, whether you're doing a time section or full-time test. Why? Because it takes a while to bubble. 2 to 3 minutes. When I was doing the logic games yesterday, I was writing down the times it took me to do the games on repeat so I could tell you later. And I realized I was about to write the time when I finished, but then I realized I should bubble first because that's part of the time. And per game it took me about 30 seconds, which is significant because you only have about 8 minutes 45 seconds per game if I'm remembering correctly. You've only got 35 minutes per section, so if it takes you 3 minutes, then that's about 10% of your time. But people just don't use answer sheets. But if you're not doing that, then test day is going to be 10% faster, and you're going to have trouble. Alright, yeah, so the only other thing I should mention is proper timing. There's a few things about timing, because test day is going to be a long experience. Test day has 4 scored sections and 1 experimental section, and also an essay, which nobody really cares about. Whereas the prep tests you have now in that book just have 4 sections. So the official timing on test day will go like this. There'll be 3 sections, then there'll be a 15-minute break, then there'll be 2 more sections, then there'll be an essay. And actually, before the sections, they're going to have you fill out a sheet of information. So you're going to get there early in the morning, or some of them are in the afternoon now, but you're going to get there a bit before your scheduled time because you don't want to be late. Then it's going to take about 30 to 40 minutes to read all the instructions and fill in your information. If I remember correctly, when I did it, they said something like, go to section 1, fill in your name in large letters, and then just really slowly reading every instruction. So it took half an hour, and at the point you're kind of it's not relaxing. So that's part of your test time. Then you get 3 35-minute section, the break, and then 2 more. So you got to get through all of that. Whereas the practice test you have now, you're only going to, you've got no intro. You just do 2 sections, a 15-minute break, and then 2 sections. So depending on your inclination, you may need to practice endurance because I found people are different. For me, even if I find the test hard, I don't really get tired by tests. I could do 10 sections of the LSAT or 10 sections of a math test, and I wouldn't be any worse at the end of that than I was at the start. Whereas some people significantly worsen over the course of the test. So you should basically just kind of pay attention. Like, do you get really tired by the end of the test? If so, then you should probably train endurance. If you don't get tired, then you can just do the 4-section tests. So people who need to train endurance, you should get a book, an older book, like 29 to 38, and add those sections as extra sections to your tests. Some people even add 6 sections. Some people even do 6-section tests so that they're overtraining, and so the test day is going to be somewhat easier. And these test instructions will be in the recorded video, so you can just watch them later. Again, if you want to make sure you don't miss anything. I'm also going to write up a checklist. So that's training for endurance, doing extra sections, and you can just pick a section at random from an old test. If you Google like random number generator, you can find a way to decide from 1 to 5 which section order should it be. The experimental section can now be any of the 5 sections. It used to be only the first 3, but that's not true anymore. Now it can be any of the 5. So you don't know which one is experimental. And your extra section can go in any spot. Quick note about the experimental section, there's like endless discussion about this. What the experimental section is just a research section to help LSAC make new tests. People hear the name experimental, they think experiment, and they think like, oh, this is going to be like this weird, different thing that I can recognize. But that's not the case at all. They're using the experimental sections to make new LSATs. So new LSATs have got to be similar to old LSATs. So they're trying to design new questions that are just like the old ones. So the experimental is not going to be like just weird, wacky thing that isn't familiar. You're gonna have no idea what the experimental is. It could be anything because you won't be able to recognize it. So don't even try, basically. After the test, it can be useful to know which one was experimental in order to know like if that was a section you did particularly well or particularly badly on, whether it counts. But during the test, you can't know. So the way it'll work, normally on a test, there's 2 logical reasoning, 1 logic games, 1 reading comprehension. The experimental could be any one of those 3. So you might have 3 logical reasoning, or 2 logic games, or 2 reading comprehension. And that's how you know which one, like, if there are 2 logic games, obviously one of them is experimental, but you won't know which one.